He was lying in a hospital bed, battered and broken, unaware that the woman he loved, the woman he thought would be by his side forever, had just left him. But the real shock? She wasn't just leaving him for any man. She was leaving him for his best friend. And as he lay there, betrayed and vulnerable, he had no idea that the very man who turned his back on him was about to lose everything he'd ever built, because the man they'd both rejected was a billionaire. And he wasn't going to let them get away with it. It all started like a normal day. Michael sat in his hospital room, alone except for the steady beeping of the heart monitor beside him. His leg, still bandaged after the car accident, ached in waves, but the pain was tolerable. He had always been able to handle pain. What he couldn't handle, however, was the message that flashed across his phone screen just moments ago. The hospital room, with its sterile white walls, smelled faintly of antiseptic and bleach. It was too quiet for Michael's liking, too lonely. The soft rustling of his sheets, the distant murmur of nurses in the hallway, and the dull hum of fluorescent lights above were his only company. He was used to it. He'd spent enough time alone over the years to become comfortable with solitude. But today everything felt different. The silence felt heavy. Michael scrolled aimlessly through his social media feeds, trying to distract himself. A notification popped up from Ella, his fiancée, with a single message: "I can't do this anymore. I'm so sorry, Michael. It's over. I'm with James now." At first, Michael stared at the message, unable to process what he had just read. His heart pounded in his chest, his breath short. His world seemed to spin. He blinked, rubbed his eyes, and looked at the screen again. But the words didn't change. Ella, the woman he had shared his life with, the one he thought would stand by him forever, had just broken up with him, and worse, she was leaving him for James, his best friend. A cold chill ran down his spine. Michael's mind went blank for a moment, and then the rush of emotions hit him like a tidal wave. Confusion, hurt, anger, betrayal. He had never felt anything like this before. He tried to make sense of it. Ella and James, his closest friend in the world. How could this be happening? He thought he knew them both so well. They had been together for 5 years. He had been by her side through everything. The highs, the lows, the plans for their future. They had built a life together, one that Michael had always believed would be his forever. But now, with one simple message, everything had been shattered. He dropped his phone onto the bed, his hands trembling. The room around him suddenly felt suffocating, the air thick with disbelief. His mind raced, trying to process what had just happened. He wanted to shout, to scream, to ask why, but the words wouldn't come. All he could do was sit there in silence, fighting the urge to cry. But the pain in his chest wasn't just physical. It was something deeper. A wound that cut far beyond the surface. It was the pain of betrayal, the sting of being discarded so easily. Ella wasn't just leaving him, she was leaving him for James, his best friend. The man he had trusted with his deepest secrets, his fears, his dreams. The man who had always been there at his side through thick and thin. Michael thought back to the moments they had shared. He remembered how Ella used to laugh, how her eyes sparkled when she spoke about their future. He remembered their late-night talks, the plans they had made, the house they were going to buy, the family they would one day have. Now all of that seemed meaningless. What had they built if she could so easily walk away? He couldn't understand it. There had been no warning signs. Yes, they'd had their disagreements, but they were normal for any relationship. They'd been together long enough to know how to work through things. Or so Michael had thought. But now, Ella's message made it clear she had already made up her mind. She had already moved on. Michael's thoughts were interrupted when the door to his room creaked open. The nurse walked in with a gentle smile, but Michael didn't return her greeting. She went about her business, checking his vitals and adjusting his but Michael hardly noticed. His mind was elsewhere, trapped in the whirlwind of emotions that were threatening to swallow him whole. "Everything's looking good, Mr. Carter," the nurse said cheerfully as she finished her routine checks. "You're healing well. The doctor will be in shortly to update you on your progress." Michael nodded absently, his eyes fixed on the wall in front of him. He couldn't focus on what she was saying. All he could think about was Ella and James, and the message that had changed everything. As the nurse left the room, Michael's gaze drifted to the window. He watched as the rain began to fall, a soft drizzle that blurred the world outside. It seemed fitting somehow. The world outside was just as blurry and uncertain as his life felt in that moment. His thoughts were a storm of confusion, regret, and anger. How could Ella do this to him? How could James? They had both been there for him at his lowest points. They were supposed to be his support system, his family, his friends, and now they had torn him apart. But there was something else too, something that gnawed at him. The question that lingered in the back of his mind like a shadow: Did they know something he didn't? Had they been playing a game that he wasn't even aware of? He had always felt like he was just a regular guy. Ordinary. But what if there was something more to him? Something that could explain this betrayal? What if they had seen something in him that he hadn't? The thought came to him like a spark in the dark. His mind raced back to the conversations he had had with his father years ago. The whispers, the hints. His father had always been distant, vague when it came to family matters. He had never really explained why things had always been so tight-lipped about their family's past. And now, Michael was starting to wonder if there was more to his background than he had been told. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Something that went beyond Ella's decision to leave him. The way James had acted in the last few months, the way Ella had been so distant before she left, maybe there was more at play here. Maybe they had known something he didn't. Just then, Michael's phone buzzed again, pulling him from his thoughts. This time it was a call from Greg, his lawyer. Michael didn't even hesitate. He picked up the phone immediately. "Michael, I'm glad I caught you." Greg's voice was urgent. "There's something you need to know. Something important about your family's estate." Michael's heart skipped a beat. "What about my family's estate?" he asked, his voice tinged with confusion. "You're going to want to sit down for this, Michael," Greg continued. "I don't know how to say this, but your father left everything to you when he passed away." Michael's mind went blank. "What do you mean, everything?" "You're the heir to a fortune, Michael," Greg said, his voice heavy. "Your father's company, his assets, everything is now yours. You're a billionaire." The words didn't sink in at first. Michael was too stunned to respond. He had always lived paycheck to paycheck. He had never been wealthy. His family had never been rich as far as he knew. He had never imagined that his father had left him a legacy so grand. The thought was impossible. "Greg, I think you've got the wrong person," Michael stammered. "I don't know anything about any fortune." But Greg insisted. "I'm telling you the truth, Michael. Your family's company is worth billions. It's all yours now. And there's more you need to know. But I need you to come into the office as soon as you can. We've got a lot to discuss." Michael sat back in his hospital bed, feeling like the world had just flipped upside down. How could this be true? He was a billionaire? And yet Ella had left him for James? What? And why didn't he know any of this? His mind was racing, and for the first time in hours he felt a spark of hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, he had more control over his life than he had ever realized. The next few days in the hospital passed in a blur. Michael barely slept, the weight of the betrayal gnawing at him every moment. Ella's message still haunted him, like a shadow that refused to leave his mind. But the new revelation from his lawyer, Greg, was even more troubling. He couldn't understand it. Billionaire? It didn't make sense. Michael had never been one to care about wealth. His life had always been about working hard, living modestly, and doing what was necessary to get by. He had always been the one in his family who stuck to the basics, never dreaming of riches or luxury. So the news that he had inherited a fortune felt like a twisted joke. He had always assumed that the money issues his family faced were normal, just part of life. Growing up, he had never been taught that they had a legacy. But now, as Greg explained over the phone, Michael was the heir to one of the largest construction companies in the country. The company his father had built from the ground up, a company with massive real estate holdings, government contracts, and millions in the bank. And suddenly, everything started to make sense, or rather, it started to spin wildly out of control. The day after Greg's call, Michael managed to get discharged from the hospital. His body was healing, but his mind felt broken. He needed answers. He had to get to the bottom of this. Greg had arranged for Michael to meet him at the office that afternoon. As Michael walked into the building, the towering structure loomed over him, as if it were silently mocking him. How could he have been so unaware of this entire world that had been right under his nose? His own family had kept him in the dark. His father's death, one that had seemed like a loss of someone who had barely known him, was now the key to everything. Greg greeted him in the lobby, his usual calm demeanor now tinged with concern. He led Michael into his office, a sleek room with glass walls, minimalist furniture, and a view of the city. "Michael," Greg said as he closed the door behind them, "I know this is a lot to take in, but we need to move quickly. There are things your father left for you, documents, legal agreements, and plans for the company. But there's also a lot that's been kept from you." Michael raised an eyebrow. "Kept from me? What do you mean?" Greg sighed and took a seat behind his desk. "Your father wasn't just a businessman. He was involved in some very powerful circles. He had a lot of enemies, and there were things he didn't want you to know. But now, with his passing, it's all come to light." Michael was silent for a moment, trying to process the information. The weight of it all was suffocating. But something didn't sit right with him. His father had always been distant, but this felt like betrayal on a much deeper level. Greg handed Michael a thick stack of papers. These are your father's last will and testament, along with his business documents. I've already gone through them. You'll see that your inheritance is tied to the company. But more importantly, there are instructions. Your father wanted you to take over. He believed you had the skills even if you didn't know it yet. Michael looked at the papers, but he couldn't focus on them. His mind was still on Ella, on James. He couldn't shake the thought that somehow this all tied together. The company, the fortune, the betrayal, was it all connected in some way? Greg, I don't understand. Why didn't my father tell me about all of this? Why was I kept in the dark for so long? Michael asked, his voice filled with frustration. Greg leaned back in his chair. Your father was protecting you, Michael. He didn't want you to get caught up in the power struggles that came with the company. He wanted you to live your own life, make your own choices. But now, with him gone, you're the one who has to take charge. There's no more hiding from the reality of what you're inheriting. Michael felt a pang of guilt. His father had tried to shield him, but in doing so, he had robbed Michael of the chance to prepare for this. He had never known what was at stake. But the deeper question nagged at him: why was Ella leaving him now? Why had she chosen James? And why had James not said a word? It was all too much to process at once. Just then Greg's phone buzzed. He glanced at it and looked back at Michael with a concerned expression. I think you need to see this, Greg said, sliding his phone across the desk to Michael. On the screen was a news article with the headline, Billionaire Michael Carter, the shocking heir to one of the country's largest construction empires. Michael's heart skipped a beat. He reached for the phone, his hands shaking. The article was everywhere. It detailed the inheritance, the company, and how Michael was now the head of one of the most influential corporations in the country. But what shocked him most was the mention of his family's connections he had never known existed. He read on, his eyes widening as the article described the behind-the-scenes dealings, the contracts with politicians, and the business relationships his father had maintained with powerful, often shady individuals. Michael's father had been involved in much more than just construction. He had been part of a network that controlled a significant portion of the city's development, real estate, and infrastructure. Michael's mind raced. This was bigger than he had ever imagined. And Ella? She hadn't just left him for James. She had left him for the very world his father had built, worlds of power and influence. Did James know about this? Was he involved in some way? Greg watched him closely. Michael, there's more you need to know. Your father was involved in some risky business ventures. You might have to make some hard decisions about how to move forward with the company. People are going to come after you for control. They'll want you to play by their rules. Michael's world felt like it was closing in on him. His father, Ella, James, everything he thought he knew was turning out to be a lie. He had to make a choice. A choice between playing the game or walking away from it all. But how could he walk away when everything he had ever known was tied up in this empire? I'll do whatever it takes, Michael said, his voice low but determined. But I need to know everything. I need to understand who's really behind all this. Greg nodded. I'll help you with that. But be careful, Michael. Some things can't be undone. The next few days were a blur of meetings, phone calls, and endless stacks of paperwork. Michael felt like he was drowning in information, trying to make sense of the chaos that had suddenly become his life. His inheritance, the company, Ella, James, everything seemed to be tangled in a web of lies and deceit, and no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't untangle it. Greg had become his guide through the maze. The lawyer had arranged for Michael to meet with the company's board of directors, the financial team, and the key players who had once been loyal to his father. But each encounter only left Michael with more questions and fewer answers. The first meeting was with the board. Michael walked into the sleek, glass-walled conference room, his mind racing. The room was filled with people he had never met, but their expressions told him everything he needed to know. They were waiting for him to take charge, to step into his father's shoes. But Michael didn't feel ready. He wasn't even sure who he could trust anymore. The chairman, a tall man in his 50s named Richard, greeted him with a handshake that felt cold and calculated. Welcome, Mr. Carter, he said, his voice smooth and professional. We've been expecting you. Michael nodded, trying to maintain his composure. He had no idea what kind of game they were playing, but he knew one thing for sure: he was in over his head. Thank you, Mr. Richards. I don't know where to begin. Don't worry, Richard said, sitting down at the head of the table. We've prepared everything for you. We're here to guide you through the process. Your father left clear instructions about how to move forward. Michael glanced around the room. The other board members sat silently, their eyes focused on him. Some appeared genuine, while others seemed to be sizing him up, weighing his every word. Richard continued, flipping through a stack of documents in front of him. Your father was a visionary. He built this company from the ground up. But it wasn't just about construction. There were partnerships, investments, and business dealings that stretched far beyond what you might have been told. Michael swallowed hard. What kind of dealings? Richard didn't flinch. Your father worked with politicians, contractors, and other influential people. There were deals, good deals, secured in exchange for favors. It's how this company grew to the level it did. And now we expect you to continue that work. Michael felt a sickening knot in his stomach. He wasn't prepared for this. His father hadn't told him any of this. All he knew was that his father had kept him away from the business, wanting him to live a normal life. But normal had just left him. He couldn't ignore the fact that the world he was thrust into was built on secrets, manipulation, and power. And what happens if I don't want to continue those deals? Michael asked, his voice shaking slightly. Richard's smile didn't reach his eyes. You don't have a choice, Mr. Carter. This company is your responsibility now. You're the one who holds the reins. You either play by the rules or you lose everything. The weight of his father's legacy hit Michael harder than ever. He had always thought that the company was just a business, just another part of his father's life. But now he realized it was so much more. It was a network of power, influence, and dirty secrets. And Michael was the one who had to inherit it all. Over the next few days, Michael pored over the documents Greg had given him. He read about the company's major investments, the influential people his father had worked with, and the complex web of deals that had kept the empire running. But it wasn't until he stumbled upon a particular section of the business records that he began to understand the full extent of what his father had been involved in. It was a file labeled Confidential, Pending Deals. Michael opened it with a sense of dread. The first few pages outlined several high-profile real estate projects his father had spearheaded, but the further he read, the more troubling the deals became. There were names of politicians, police officers, and business owners that his father had been tied to. Some of them were well-known figures, others were more obscure, but all of them seemed to have one thing in common. They were all involved in questionable dealings. Corruption, bribery, and under-the-table exchanges had fueled the rise of the company. Michael's blood ran cold as he flipped through the pages, realizing the kind of power his father had wielded. He had never known about these dark corners of the business, and now they were his to manage. It was more than Michael had ever bargained for. But just as he was about to put the file down, something caught his eye. A name. A familiar name. James. Michael's hands froze. The file described James as one of his father's trusted contacts, someone involved in facilitating key business deals. But the details were vague, and Michael couldn't quite piece together what his best friend's role had been. Why hadn't James told him about this? What had he been involved in? Michael's stomach churned as the implications of the file settled in. James had known about his father's dealings. Had James been involved in the corruption? Had he been using Michael for some hidden agenda? The thought made Michael feel sick. The man who had once been his closest friend, the one who had stood by him through thick and thin, was now a stranger. And the worst part? James had been with Ella, his fiancée. They had taken everything from him, but they hadn't even told him the truth. That evening, Michael called Greg. He needed to know more. Greg, I need to meet with James, Michael said, his voice tight with emotion. I need to understand what's going on. Greg was silent for a moment. Michael, I'm not sure if that's a good idea. James is deeply involved in this, too involved. He knows things that you may not want to hear. I don't care, Michael replied, his voice firm. I need to confront him. I need to know the truth. Greg sighed. I'll arrange a meeting, but be careful. James is not the man you think he is. Michael hung up, feeling the weight of Greg's warning in his gut. But he couldn't back down now. He had to confront James. He had to uncover the truth, no matter how painful it might be. As the night stretched on, Michael's mind was consumed by thoughts of betrayal, lies, and the dark world his father had left behind. It felt like everything was spiraling out of control. But he had no choice. He was already too deep in it to walk away. The next day he would face James. And the truth would come with it, no matter what it cost. Michael stood in front of the luxurious, modern building, the sharp edges of its glass and steel reflecting the cold light of the afternoon sun. This was James' office, the place where they had once laughed and shared dreams of the future. Now it felt like the place where everything had fallen apart. Michael took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. He wasn't sure what he was walking into, but he knew one thing. He couldn't leave until he had answers. Inside, the receptionist greeted him politely but with a curious glance. Michael's mind was still spinning from the revelations he had uncovered over the past few days. His father's empire, his inheritance, the dark deals, all of it weighed heavily on him. And now James, the man who had been his closest friend, the one who knew all his secrets, was now the center of everything. The betrayal he had felt from Ella now seemed almost secondary to the pain of discovering the depth of his friend's deception. As Michael entered the conference room, he saw James sitting at the far end, dressed in his usual sharp suit, his demeanor calm and collected. He looked almost too at ease, as if everything was still normal. But Michael could see the tension in his eyes, the faintest flicker of discomfort as he noticed Michael walking in. "Michael," James greeted him, standing up to shake his hand. "It's good to see you. How are you holding up?" Michael forced a smile, though every fiber of his being was screaming to confront him. "How am I holding up?" Michael repeated, his voice laced with sarcasm. "You really want to know? After everything you've done?" James looked taken aback, his expression faltering for a moment before he quickly regained control. "What are you talking about, man? I thought we were past all of this. You've been in the hospital, I've been helping you." Michael cut him off, his voice rising. "Helping me? Is that what you call it? You're the reason I'm here. You and Ella. You left me when I needed you the most, and now I'm learning all this about you, about my father, my inheritance, and your involvement in everything." James' eyes narrowed. "Michael, slow down. You've been through a lot. I'm sure you've misinterpreted some things." "No," Michael snapped, slamming a hand down on the table between them. "I've seen the documents, James. I've seen your name. You were involved in my father's business, his shady deals. You've been using me. Using my trust." The room fell into a tense silence. James opened his mouth, but no words came out. He looked like he was calculating his next move, weighing his options. Finally, he sighed, sitting back in his chair. "All right," he said, his voice steady but tinged with regret. "It's true. I was involved in your father's business. I didn't know how to tell you, Michael. Your father was in too deep and I got caught up in it. But it wasn't what you think. It wasn't just about money or power. I never meant to hurt you." Michael's heart pounded as he listened. This wasn't the confrontation he had expected. James wasn't defending himself, he was confessing. But the weight of his words made everything feel more twisted, more complicated. "You're telling me that you were just following orders? That you had no choice?" Michael's voice was full of disbelief. "That's not how this works, James. You made your own choices. You could have walked away." James clenched his fists, clearly frustrated with himself. "I know. I was trying to protect you, Michael. I thought if I kept you in the dark, you wouldn't be dragged into this mess. But then Ella, she got involved too. She found out everything and she found out everything?" Michael repeated, his voice cold. "So that's why she left me? Because she was part of it too." James looked guilty but didn't deny it. "Ella, and she wasn't supposed to find out. But when she did, she wanted more. She saw the power, the potential, and she saw you as someone who couldn't give her what she wanted." Michael's chest tightened. "You mean she left me because she thought I wasn't enough for her?" "No," James said quickly, shaking his head. "It wasn't like that. She thought she could have it all. And when she realized you were connected to your father's business, the money, the influence, she wanted to be part of that. I didn't know how to tell you. I didn't know how to stop her." Michael's mind was reeling. Ella had known all along. She had been with him, planning their future, but all the while she had been thinking of something else, something bigger. And James? The man who had been his closest friend had not only betrayed him but had also let him walk into a world of lies, knowing full well what would happen. "I don't know who you two are anymore," Michael muttered, staring at his hands. "You both used me. You saw me as a pawn in some game. I thought you were my friends. You were supposed to have my back." James looked down, unable to meet Michael's gaze. "I'm sorry. I wish I had done things differently. But it's too late now." Michael stood up, his fists clenched. "You don't get to apologize, James. Not after everything. You don't get to walk away from this." "Michael, I never meant for it to go this far," James said softly. "I didn't want to hurt you. I wanted to help you, protect you. But I got lost in it." The anger in Michael's chest simmered down, replaced by a deep sense of betrayal. He had trusted James, trusted Ella, and they had both turned their backs on him. But even in the pain, Michael realized something. This was his life, his future, his choice to make. "I don't know if I can forgive you," Michael said quietly, his voice steady now. "But I can move on. I'm not going to let this define me. I'm going to take control of my life. James looked at him with a mixture of sorrow and understanding. I get it, Michael. You've got your own path now. I've screwed up. But whatever happens, I'll always be here. Michael turned to leave but stopped at the door. No, James. It's not about me being here for you anymore. It's about me being here for myself. I'm done with your world. And I'm done with the lies. As Michael walked out of the office, the weight that had been hanging over him for days seemed to lift, if only slightly. He had uncovered the truth. It wasn't easy, but now he was free. Free from Ella. Free from James. Free from the dark empire his father had built. The world before him was uncertain, but one thing was clear. It was his to claim. Michael stood outside, the weight of the world still heavy on his shoulders but with a newfound clarity. Sometimes, the hardest battles are not against those who betray us but against the lies we've believed about ourselves. The pain of betrayal might never go away, but with it comes the chance to rebuild, to redefine who we are. Do you feel like Michael? Have you ever been betrayed by someone you trusted? What would you do if you found out the people you loved were hiding secrets that could change everything? Comment below with your thoughts on betrayal and how you would handle it. And don't forget to share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Sometimes, the hardest truths are the ones that set us free.